Hey, welcome on, guys. Tobin here with you. Thanks for checking out the channel. Let's do a little memory lane stuff here today. This was brought up by a podcast where Devin Booker was on I think it was D'Angelo Russell's podcast. And this had gotten clipped, I think, is at least the juiciest part, I think, from the podcast. It's the only part that I really see. And I don't know if I can play the audio for you guys because it's got music on it. I don't want to get ripped and flagged. So you guys can go seek out the actual clip if you want to. But here's what he had said. He said D'Angelo Russell was asking him, and he said, yeah, I thought I was going to Miami. That's where I was hoping. Miami was my best workout. And then I remember Pat Riley came into the room, and he did an interview where he's like, we're looking for a player like Klay Thompson. We need to up our shooting. And I just shot 40% on threes in college. So I'm like, oh, yeah. I was looking at spots down there by the arena. The draft is crazy. Your life changes like that, and you have no control over it, really. So obviously, this is one of the more controversial Heat drafts in history because the Heat have been very good at drafting as of late. They've been great at it. They've been really, really good. And this was an interesting one because this was a great Heat battle for years. One of the OG, I don't want to say OG. It was one of the first battles post Big Three that Heat fans had because it was the typical winning versus big stats debates that the Miami Heat fan, quite frankly, got wrong because a lot of Heat fans would go and die on the hill that Justise Winslow was the right pick because the Miami Heat, he was a winning player, especially his rookie year. Do everything, played every game, would defend his ass off, and was just like the quintessential Heat culture type player. Will do it all. Honestly, had a little bit of like Bam to him early on, not exactly as the same as players, but Justise would get after it defensively. And I think that if we all saw Justise Winslow's first playoff performance where, man, he wasn't scared. You know, that was they were dogs. They were going into this. I had a bet with an Australian member of parliament over this between Goran Dragic versus Ben Simmons, D Wade's final year. I really thought that this was I was like, this guy, he's got something to him. This is going to be a flourishing Heat career that Justise Winslow is going to bring to the table. On the other side of the country, you have Devin Booker, who, I mean, these were some awful Sun teams that he was on for a long time. I mean, we're talking what, 5 seasons of this just being really putrid basketball that he's playing on. But obviously, he was a baby. He was 19, 20, 21, 22. And he was putting up incredible scoring numbers, but these teams were awful. These are the records of Devin Booker's first 4 seasons: 23 wins, 23 and 59, 24 and 58, 21 and 61, 19 and 63. Then they have the year where they go to the bubble. Of course, that was kind of looked at as the launching point of the Suns. They were 34 and 39. Before going into the bubble or with the bubble. They have that undefeated run in the bubble. And then, of course, they have the next year where they win 50-plus games. They have Chris Paul, end up going to the finals that year, nearly won the championship. It's pretty crazy. It's a pretty crazy record story for Devin Booker's career. But all the while, the Heat fan was kind of mocking Devin Booker because this was always a thing. Everybody would look at him and be like, this guy is a way better player than Justise Winslow. But as Heat fans, you were sitting here and being like, no, Justise Winslow contributes to winning, facilitates, he defends, he does it all. Can't make a layup, but he does a little bit of everything. His three-point shot was kind of improving, but not one that you ever thought was reliable. He was never going to be the offensive player that Devin Booker was. And then, interestingly, it was funny. This guy was such a fascinating player because I remember I don't remember if it was going into his second year or his third year. I remember asking about Heat culture, and he had a very strange quote to me where he's like, he goes, I not only have Heat culture, but I have my own Winslow culture. I was like, what the hell does that mean? But Justice's career kind of came to a strange end with the Miami Heat because he was a guy that dealt with the one thing that you could say, Devin Booker, was putting up big scoring numbers, pretty durable player throughout his career, had some more stuff flare up over the last couple of years, but a pretty durable player. And Justise just had, injuries were part of his story, like right off the bat. Like second year, had a bad injury, then would miss, games from time to time. And then his last year with the Miami Heat was probably the most frustrating one, because you had this year, and it's so interesting looking back now at that first Jimmy Butler season and what that opening day roster was, because you had Dion Waiters there, you still had James Johnson, you had Justise Winslow, and you're like, and Spo's out here, he's starting like an undrafted point guard in Kendrick Nunn and Duncan Robinson, and so all these guys who have these credentials of 4-year contracts and former first round picks are like not a part of the equation. Although I remember distinctly that year, there was a couple of things that were interesting with Justise Winslow going into his the first Jimmy Butler season, because one, him and Jimmy Butler did like this photo shoot. I don't remember who it was for, but I remember asking Justise about this at Media Day, and they ended up doing like this photo shoot because they were both from Texas. They were both from the Houston area. Although I asked Justise like, well, Jimmy's not really from Houston. He's from Tomball. I was like, all right, sorry, dude. Whatever. I'm sorry I didn't know the Texas equation. But it was interesting because Justise had this amazing opening night for the Miami Heat. Like, just killed it, because Jimmy Butler was not with the team. If you guys remember, Jimmy Butler had his first kid right as his Heat career started, and Spo's like, hey, go enjoy the birth of your child. So we didn't get Jimmy Butler until like game 4 with the Miami Heat that season. And Justise Winslow burst onto the scene. I want to say that season was, I want to say that was against Memphis. Let me see. Basketball Reference. Can you bring this right up here? Yeah. Nope, that's the wrong season, jackass. Click the right one. There we go. Yeah, Justise Winslow. It was a home game against Memphis, and Justise Winslow had 27 points, 5 rebounds, 7 assists, 1 steal, 1 block. I mean, one of the best games that he's ever played as a Heat player, quite frankly. And I remember, him saying something to the effect afterwards of like, yeah, I deserve this. I've been putting in the work, and he wasn't like, I think, thought of as like the main key, because they had brought in Jimmy. And how is this going to work? Is the spacing going to work? These are all questions that were going into that season. All the while, Devin Booker's teams were improving, and he's obviously come on to be, he's gone on to be a monster star. He's finished top 5 in MVP. He's racked up, 3 out of 4 all-star seasons. Justise Winslow out of the league. And it was interesting there were some articles that had come out in the aftermath of this that talked a lot about like, Justise Winslow talked about his depression, drinking too much, partying too much, enjoying the Miami lifestyle too much. And he had even, I think, referred to himself as an energy vampire. And there were even times afterwards with his career, I think that that he was receiving like, wellness calls from like Eric Spoelstra. And Eric Spoelstra had like put him through like Navy SEAL workouts to try and like get him back to what he should be. And, it was one of those things where you'd realize like Eric Spoelstra really does invest life points into his players. Like he genuinely does care about these guys. But it has been in an aftermath. Look, Justise Winslow has his career riddled by injuries and inconsistencies, and they inevitably traded him that first Jimmy Butler season. We know traded him to the Memphis Grizzlies, and they end up with Andre Iguodala, Jay Crowder. End up being a pretty good trade for the Miami Heat that obviously bolstered their rotation a little bit, and was very, very helpful. So yeah, it does end up being one of the, so you have Devin Booker come out here with this whole spiel, and it is interesting that he is in the midst of Team USA with Eric Spoelstra, with Bam Adebayo. And that was, I remember distinctly after they drafted Justise Winslow, which, look, going back to that draft night, remember, this is a guy that like Danny Ainge was ready to offer like 9 picks for Justise Winslow. And Justise Winslow was coming off a championship team, a Duke team, and everybody was like, how is he falling this much? The Heat had thought this is Caron Butler all over again happening for them. So, it was kind of the quintessential like, hey, guy who very clearly has the offensive talent to the guy who is an engine for winning. And the Heat went with engine for winning because that's what they do. They always seem to go with that element of, hey, this guy, he's a winning player. But yeah, not everybody is ready for that mantle. It doesn't always work out like that. And the Heat have obviously gone from this draft mishap because Devin Booker is, arguably the best player from that draft. I mean, if you go back to the 2015 draft, D'Angelo Russell, part of that class, you have Karl Anthony Towns, who was the number 1 overall pick, D'Angelo Russell, Kristaps Porzingis, the Heat, that was Frank Kaminsky right before, Justise Winslow, Miles Turner, who's had a nice career, Devin Booker, but I don't believe there's anybody on the bottom half of that draft. There's good players. Bobby Portis was in that draft. Terry Rozier was in that draft. And DeLon Wright. But, yeah, I would say Devin Booker. I think most people would take Devin Booker over Karl Anthony Towns, especially now. He's probably the best player in that draft. So it is looked upon as a guy when he says that he thought he was looking for spaces and he was looking for places in Miami, and you end up going with Justise Winslow. It's going to be looked upon as one of the all-time what ifs in Heat history. Though I will say, look, I think the Heat fan did the right thing at the time. You defend your guy. You defend your guy. Shout out to the Miami Heat beat for their parody songs, the hashtag Justice Better, because I think in some ways as a fan, you do need to be pig-headed with this stuff. Same thing with like Tua versus Justin Herbert, where like for years you were sitting here having to defend the Tua pick because Herbert has an incredible rookie year and most passing yards through the first 4 seasons. You got to defend your guy. You got to stand up for your guy. So I respect the Heat fan for sticking up for Justice, especially in that rookie season. I thought he had a nice rookie season. I thought that he brought a winning mentality, especially in that first playoff series against the Sixers. I won't forget that. And it just didn't turn out well. It didn't turn out well. Now, the new one that everyone is going to, which I think was almost way more obvious right off front, is the Maxey Precious Achiuwa blowing that pick, because, and I get the justification for the Heat because they had just taken Tyler Hero. Tyler was fresh off a finals appearance, and everybody thought that his star was going to go, through the roof, and now Tyrese has kind of already passed him, and Precious Achiuwa got traded immediately for Kyle Lowry. So that to me is almost more of that to me is almost more of an obvious whiff right off the bat, because Devin Booker, while he was putting up monster numbers, these were some putrid teams that he was on early on in his career. And so everybody was kind of like, it's like, he can score, but is it looter and a riot? But you got to wonder if these talks are going on. I just did my list, the recruitment list. If you guys missed that video, go check it out. My Team USA recruitment rankings. And this is why Devin Booker, was a little bit up on the list, because what if he beats Kevin Durant to the punch? He's like, hey, you know what? Let's right a wrong. That happened many years ago. Who's to say? Oh, I watched that Eric Spoelstra Steph Curry video way too much. Way too much, man. Way too much. But it was, look, Justice had some things. Obviously, personally, didn't seem like he could handle the fame pressure right off the bat too well. D Wade leaving was a weird thing. Who was going to take the keys of the franchise? And nobody really did. And there was to a point where even Josh Richardson, who was the second round pick of the year, Rook 1, Rook 2, had even really passed Justise Winslow, I think, as reliability, being a go-to guy, being a go-to scorer. But neither of those guys could really, there was also a point, like neither of those guys really filled the void of D Wade, to the point where even D Wade eventually, coming back helped a little bit with that. But, it just never really got on track for Justice. And I think health was and health was obviously a very big factor on that too. But thanks a lot, Devin. Appreciate the run down memory lane.